Well, I'm back speaking with Professor Michael Fullan in this series of conversations that we're having, where we're using his seminal works, both books and articles, as a bit of a lens to explore the evolution of educational change ideas over the last 50 years or so. And today we're coming up to a conversation around kicking off about 2003, and I'm going to try to bound it around to 2010. Michael, it's great to be back with you. How are you doing today?
It's good. I'm doing great. I'm ready to go back to the beginning of this century and relive some of that heyday where we started into actual large-scale reform.
Well, Michael, let me just set the scene a little bit for people who are following along here and think about 2003. You left us off at the end of episode 3, just starting to bring together the way that you'd move from really focusing on theory and complexity and change into working alongside and learning alongside practitioners. In the last episode, we thought about your work in the Learning Consortium with a range of districts in the broader Toronto area, but also learning alongside the work that Michael Barber was leading with colleagues in England around a transformation of literacy and numeracy work. And we sort of left it off in 2003, where you said, hey, election of a new government in the province of Ontario in Canada, that you'd set your 3 big focus areas around high school graduation, literacy, numeracy, and public trust and commitment in the system. And you'd started to build a secretariat that was going to pull together some of the best thinkers and practitioners and try to provide the capacity building and support in this area. So why don't you kind of take us to this transition from having the strategy and bringing together the consolidation of that last decade of learning for you across multiple systems into a strategy for your home system, and kick us off late 2003, early 2004.
Right. And so it was, sometimes you think this is magically planned, but because the sequences weren't planned by us, but they happened this way. Yeah. We just were on the heels of understanding the English reform on literacy and numeracy and picking out the lessons, the do's and the don'ts. And literally, as we finished that report, the new premier in Ontario, Dalton McGuinty, got elected and took office in October 2003 after 8 or 10 years of conservative government where they were bashing teachers and it was negative, it was all negative climate. And Dalton came in with a education, the Tony Blair trio mindset. And he started to meet with me 3 months before the election and said, when I get elected, because he was confident, he said, we want to make this a priority and really, he didn't say do it better than the English, but it was kind of like that. We know what they did. Let's see what we can do.
Yeah, it's good. Okay, so you've got this focus area, these 3 focus areas. You've started to build up this secretariat. And take me into this first election cycle. So you've got about 4 years, 2004 to 2008. And many of us know the challenges of moving things forward within an election cycle to actually build confidence that this strategy can actually have an impact. And I've read a little bit through All Systems Go, a great synthesis of some of your thinking at this time, written about 2010. Other work like Large Scale Reform Comes of Age, or The Wrong Drivers for School Reform. Sort of the 2010, 2011 Michael Fullan writing is a lovely way actually for people to get a sense of what you were learning over those 7 to 8 years. But I want to zoom in here about some of the lessons in action that 2004 through to 2008. So tell me a little bit about the importance of focus and avoiding distractions when you're thinking about large-scale reform like this.
So we had that, I remember the first meeting after the premier got elected, we also, his minister, whose name was Gerard Kennedy, was also a great minister. And so the 2 of them were the education wing, and they were meeting with me in October, like a few days after the election. And we didn't have any trouble at all. We said, let's focus, let's make it simple isn't quite the right word, but let's not be diffuse. Let's really pick the priorities, really figure out, especially around implementation. Yes. Dalton was very interested in implementation because he knew ideas could come and go and they wouldn't have much to show for it. So we literally almost instantly It wasn't one of these things like, let's have a big commission and understand it. There had been a commission on Ontario, Royal Commission, just prior to that they recommended some things about focusing. But to get to the very point, we said, let's really just do this. And we'll do it by, we need to have focus. We've got these 3 focuses of literacy, numeracy, high school graduation. We've got raise the bar, close the gap, which is the equity focus. We've got increasing the public schools emphasis on it. And we also had one to focus on enabling teachers to trust the government, I guess is one way of putting it, that we really have been an 8-year period of not doing that. So we said, okay, we're going to focus. We've got the content of the focus, but we also know a lot, and thanks to England, this is the positive finding, capacity building. You may remember or see, because you were a little bit part of that with Michael Barber, there was massive investment in capacity building, literacy consultants, a national literacy strategy, and that. So we understood that capacity was going to be a powerful means of getting this developed. And we even added a unit to the Ministry of Education, a brand new unit called the Literacy Numeracy Secretariat. It's now called the Learning Secretariat. We said the ministry doesn't have the capacity to lead this. We need to build the capacity inside the ministry, coordination. We brought some leading people from the field, some to lead it, like Avis Glaze, who was a famous educator from one of the districts, and later on, Mary Jean Gallagher, who still works with me. So we really took the best of the field, put together a unit within the ministry, and had them relate to the regions of the province. There were, I think, 6 regions, 5 or 6, and we had teams at the Secretariat whose job was to focus on those districts. We had a total of 72 school districts, and to hammer home at focus. So focus, because it was specific, it put a lot of pressure. We could have used the words pressure and support, but it really felt more like support, I think. When we talked to people, they felt, we've got support coming here. We don't feel like this is being imposed on us. We think, literacy is a good idea. High school graduation, So there was a general receptivity. And the main goal, I think, was how do you catch people's attention so they have confidence that something is really going to happen here and that it's worth putting more energy into. And so we were fast off the mark and started to get success right away, year by year, in those beginnings by the focus. We also looked at accountability and said, we think the English got it wrong. They were too heavy-handed about the targets and too heavy-handed about the kind of the assessments and the following up on whether it's happening or not, the pressure. So we said, we're going to be transparent. And it's our transparency and our specificity that is going to amount to the pressure, because it'll be a kind of in your face, but supportive.
Got it. I like this. So, I love how you're helping us understand how you're building on the lessons learned and those live natural experiments that have been run elsewhere in the world, including obviously the one that you were evaluating along with other colleagues around what was happening over that period of the literacy and numeracy strategy being enacted in England. So we have here focus with precision, which, I'll pick up, comes up over and over in the last decade of your work as well. This individual and collective capacity building, and then some rethinking around accountability. I think you often use the descriptor intelligent accountability. So let's kind of delve in. I guess we've thought a little bit about this focus and precision. I want to pick up a little bit more about the capacity building. I suppose everyone just assumes, of course, if we're going to do change now, we need to help build capacity at the district level and then all the way through to the school level. But I think it's really interesting is that actually we can't just use the existing architecture to do that. We actually got to build a new unit. We've got to have highly credible expert educators leading that, not just general government bureaucrats, but actually people who know the work and who have a track record and credibility in doing that work. Tell us a little bit more about that capacity building work, initially led by Avis Glaze, and then, as you said, Mary Jean later on. Help us sort of understand the cascade from the Secretariat all the way through to supporting at the coalface of schoolwork.
Good. Because that was really the first time, I think, that a big system, at least in the Western world, had really taken capacity building as a system priority.
Yeah.
And so what is capacity building? We said, well, it's not about the curriculum, actually. It's what's done with the curriculum. So we had good curriculum, but we said the curriculum in the classroom, in the school, is about pedagogy, teaching and learning and pedagogy more than it is about the content. And so we said, okay, the skill then is about pedagogical skills. Where do those exist? How do you multiply them? You will need, we put in every school almost, I think, a lot of literacy consultants. So not only did we have them in the government ministry secretariat, but we also gave funds to the 72 local school districts to appoint a literacy and a numeracy consultant in just about every school. These are the 4,000 schools in the province. So we had people, and then we mobilized those people around the pedagogy of implementing this work. And we leveraged it by increasing collaboration so that people collaborate, it moves faster. And we further leveraged it by putting the emphasis on leadership, school principal, change the school principal from just being a manager or just being generally supportive to being specifically part and parcel of the learning focus on what are the capacities in the case of elementary level or primary level, what are the capacities that people need to improve literacy and numeracy. And in a few minutes, we can talk about secondary school reform, because we started that 2 years later and with great success, and a particular strategy linked to that. But our first steps in capacity building was elementary or primary, and it was literacy and numeracy. It was highly specific. And we had this attitude towards we want to be specific, but we want to be known for our non-judgmentalism. That if people, non-judgmentalism is, and we actually, I'm going to put it this way, we trained the premier and the minister to be non-judgmental. And what that means, if something's not working, the attitude should be, let's do something to make it work. It should be, no, they need support, they need development. Let's bring it out in the open. Let's have positive pressure to do that. So we were really careful, and even things about eventually the transparency of the data that the newspapers, eventually we allowed them access to publish it. They could publish the school scores, but that was once we built the trust with the teachers.
All right, let me pick up some of these things, because I think many people listening to this now, Michael, would say, oh, well, we've got lots of that operating in our system. Obviously, here I am based in Australia, across our state systems. I'm in and out of a lot of the systems in Western Canada. And people might say, oh, we've got people in the ministry that's about capacity building. We have literacy and numeracy coaches available to us. But this is a new phenomenon in 2004. You guys, and then England, of course, pioneering before, these were new ideas around large-scale capacity building, consistency. And what I love about what you've sort of described there is it's very much building a learning culture at all levels of the system. And I think now we might use the language of things like Amy Edmondson's work around psychological safety, which fits beautifully with what you were pioneering around non-judgmentalism, which is we can't learn our way into solving these complex problems if there's a sense of blame, judgmentalism. That's going to lead to people hiding things, covering things up, trying to do whatever they can to make the data potentially look better than it is. And so building that kind of safe learning culture at all levels, focusing on pedagogy, as you say, not just curriculum change. It's all about what actually gets taught in classrooms. But then I just want to pick up, before we move on to accountability and maybe the secondary reform, Michael, this insight around the leadership at the school level, not just at the district level, not just at the state or the province level, but at the school level, that if capacity building is really going to take root, it can't just be about external experts being able to come in, but that principal role, or in the UK, we call that a head teacher, that is a crucial role that, as you say, needs to really start to come to the fore around leading this work. Tell me a little bit about, at this stage, what you're learning about that role of the principal in developing a school culture and architecture internally around learning to do this precise work.
Well, I think one of the important things to say about this, remember we're talking 2014, 2015, whatever, is that the capacity building that we did was new.
Yeah.
And
this is 2004, 2015. You've jumped a decade there. So
wait a
about
minute.
2004. Yeah.
I'm too excited about the future. Sorry.
Good.
Yeah. 2005, when we're talking about it. But it was new then. And what we did, we didn't just say we should have a literacy coach, we should have principals. We had, I remember being part of a lot of these, we had regional meetings that the Secretariat ran for regions in the province. We had annual meetings where the meetings were focusing on what was being learned and what was being implemented. That the contributors to those sessions were the practitioners, like leading principals, leading literacy consultants. The Secretariat enabled them, but the people that were feeding the future were those that were the leading implementation. And just one other example, we did things like Carol Campbell and I did studies of districts that were on the move. There were 8 of them, I think. And we profiled those, not as, why can't you be more like your brother, but more like, here's what it looks like. We had another strategy that we took the 100 primary schools that had success in at least 4 of the measures of grade 3 and grade 6 literacy and numeracy. And we said, here's 100 of them. Here's a profile, 10-page profile. Here's some money, go and visit them. We don't want you to, don't think of it as you should be doing exactly what they should be doing, but they've sort of figured it out. Let's take a look. Let's learn from each other. So we had this really learning atmosphere that permeated it. And the judgment was low, but the explicitness was high.
Yeah, I really like this. It's interesting, Michael. I see across multiple systems, at least in the English-speaking world, people doing regional review type work, district review. We're trying to get implementers to come and to talk and to share. And again, as you've said a couple of times, this was all new. Even if you think about, say, Vivian Robinson's work around the work of the school principal and that difference in findings around a transformational leader versus an instructional leader. This is all part of the language now that we have adopted, but this was new. The idea that principals as lead learners, as you later coin, driving and developing that culture of learning. But then what you're showing is that learning can't just be at the school level. It also needs to be across schools and indeed across the province or the state. But it's not, hey, look at this guide of this is what you should do. Be more like this school or this district. It's come and learn about their processes and the way it's working in that context, and then thoughtfully apply it in your context in a way that's appropriate. And I think that's a much wiser way to think about scaling up improvements. It's not about taking something that's working here and making it work in a very different context, but as you've demonstrated, this building a learning culture at all levels of the system.
Right. And one very important thing, I think, is just the historical periods we're talking about, is that what we did was new then in 2005, 2006. It would not be relevant for a system to go full bore on this strategy in 2020.
Okay.
Right? That's very important. It was right then, and I didn't know it wouldn't be right for the future. We'll get to that. But it was right for that time. But if you did focus on this now, NAPLAN and all those things that accompanied it, it's the wrong strategy now for reasons we'll talk about later.
Yeah, that's probably an important piece for you to put in here. Everyone listen up. We're talking historically here about the evolution of these ideas that are now all over the place and accepted, but these are new innovations. We're talking particularly around this evolution of the lessons learned from England and then how they're applied and potentially upgraded and adjusted for the Ontario context. All right, so let's just stay in this Ontario learning here. We've thought about focus and precision. We've thought about thoughtful capacity building with a culture of safety and learning around that. And how that fits to accountability. You mentioned before about the secondary reform. So we've focused a little bit so far about particularly elementary or primary reform for literacy and numeracy. Talk to us about your aspirations in secondary reform and some of the work that got underway a couple of years later around 2006.
Yeah, it was in principle, it was a similar strategy because it was capacity building, but the content was very different. Okay. And And so we had about 1,000 secondary schools across 72 districts. And when we started in it, the results actually were quite low. It was, I think, 62% of students who entered year 9, which was the beginning of the first year, were graduating by year 12. Okay. So very low. Yeah. And we in this about 8-year period, we went from 62% to 84%, 2 or 3% a year. Yeah, wow. And this is how we did it. We took the same principles, but it had a different, format in it. For example, instead of having a literacy coach, we developed a role called Student Success Teacher, SST. Nice. And every school, all 1,000 of them, had a Student Success Teacher funded by the government, but run by the district and the school. Okay. Every district had Student Success leaders, and their job was to help the school principal and help the teachers get that focus, maintain that focus, facilitate learning. And then when we had their regional meetings, the SST teachers were often the facilitators of what's the province learning. So we had all that around. The capacity building was fueled by a highly specific focus on what is it that's working to help students be successful that weren't being. And there were 2 things that were powerful. One was just paying attention to the students that were dropping out. Somebody cares for me. Why aren't you? We had student success teachers trying to find students who weren't at school in the neighborhood. Like, why aren't you at school, kind of thing. So the attention to students was one big thing.
Cares, an adult who knows you're missing and who cares and follows it up. Yeah.
And the other one, which was equally important, we created these specialist high skill majors, they're called. So specialist high skill major was a content focus. There turned out to be about 40 of them. They were forestry, recreation, local health, finance. They were, they're vocational in one would say, but basically that student, that the district would develop 1 or more of these with our money, money coming from the government. We would help do that. When they got approved, they would launch it, and they would have, students could then take the focus of their choice, spend half of the day in a placement, not in a school, but in a forestry agency or a health center or whatever it was, practicing. And so they had half of their day on their very strong focus and half of their day on their academic subjects, let's say. And that we then started to learn from each other. This is also very important about capacity building. It's not just the individual capacity building or even group capacity building. It's the system that fuels the lateral learning of those that are implementing the new capacities. Lateral learning all the time. And this is where the leadership of the school came back in, the leadership of the district, because their job was, and the secretariat's job was to make sure that this was always focused and it was always being processed as a learning proposition laterally across the schools and across the system. So then when you saw these high school graduation, it starts to go up 2%, 2%. And before you know it, we've got like 84%. This is like 9-10 years later, but cumulative success, everybody knew it. And it was part of the celebration of capacity building, only in this case applied to secondary schools.
Lots of great lessons there, and I think for those who are focused on secondary schooling, often people think this is overlooked too often at the moment as an area for systematic and precise improvement. I love how there's analogous elements of, you've got this student success person who's been deployed to support for those upper high school, and there's a similar model there that is similar to what was happening for the primary schools in literacy and numeracy. You've got that lateral learning going up over time. That implementation is a learning process. It's not only a delivery process, it's actually also a learning process, learning at the school level. And then, as you say, unlocking that learning, lateral learning, all the way within a district and then across districts. And I also love for both, Michael, just this idea of compounding small changes, right? Yeah. It's not this quick fix that happens in 2 years within half of a political cycle. It's doing the right work with precision, holding your nerve and letting that add up over time, and the sort of J-curve almost of benefits that happen as people really are learning from each other, transferring that learning, and getting that compounding benefit. And I think it's a great example in action of not just looking for a quick fix, but actually these are complex human challenges that if you can get the right strategy, keep learning your way through, you can get those compounding improvements over more like half a decade to a decade rather than, 6 months to 2 years.
Yeah, it's the part about focus, right? Stay the course.
Got it.
Don't flip around to have priorities every 2 or 3 years. Stay that course. Now you have to be getting the reaction and support from teachers and principals that this is a good course to stay. That is, they like it. They're getting results. The parents like it. Other administrators. So that's what it was like for those 8 years, 2003 to 2012, let's say. That's the period where people they knew it was working. They fed each other's energy. Yeah. The results were known. Surveys of parents about the school system were showing that they appreciated the public school system more than they had in the past.
Michael, I've heard you quote before Kurt Lewin, where I think the quote is, the best way to understand something is to try to change it.
Exactly.
And I kind of can't help but feel like, this decade of what's the chances of actually in your home system having a reform-minded premier who wants to put education? I know you said you don't plan these things, but it couldn't have been better timing. You're kind of at the peak of your insights and power, and then there you are in your home place, getting to do this work over time. We've heard from you that you said this is not a blueprint for reform now, but I think there's so many things that you've shared today around focus, precision, capacity building, collective learning, lateral learning, intelligent accountability, staying the course that still have absolute relevance to thinking now, but as you suggested, probably are useful but not sufficient as the entire strategy.
Yeah, there's one other example, Simon, I want to use because it's almost like we didn't spend a lot of energy making the right decisions. We seem to make the right decisions. So I want to use this other prominent example. Sure. The first term was of the 4-year term that McGuinty was in. It was quite successful. So he got reelected. Quite a bit of a reason was the success of the education priorities. But this would be now 2006, he gets reelected. And then we had a meeting just after the election. And the meeting was, well, we should do something about early learning. We don't have compulsory learning or services for 3 and 4-year-olds. Shouldn't we have that? All the studies were showing that, and some of our Fraser Mustard, a famous doctor here, had been a leader for more of this. Anyways, to make a long story short, we had a meeting one day after the election. Yes. And literally we spent 2 hours, and at the end of the 2 hours say, let's do this. We'll appoint a one person commission to map it out, not to tell us whether to do it, but to spend a year culling from the field how we should do it. So that was Charles Pascal, who we appointed to do that. And we worked with him. He came in, and then it took us, it seemed to me like a few days to say yes to the main recommendations, which were adding year 3 and year 4 programs for 3 and 4-year-olds to the system. I think it was 250,000 students, and it was going to be added in 3 waves because we didn't have the capacity to do it all at once. So year 1, but then the others wanted it, so it accelerated. It got it added quickly. We revised the curriculum. We had early learning assistants as well as teachers. We had all the lessons we used about capacity building and getting the right thing were done. Within 24 months, those 250,000 students were there. We had a whole system of 3 and 4-year-olds, and we had it externally evaluated. It started to show results very strongly about students doing better. Those students, the first cohort, when they got into grade 1, doing better than they would have, I think, in comparison. So it was another big input. The same principles, capacity building clearly, but very different because you had to have different capacities, different curriculum, different setup. Who does do they report to the school principal? How do you put all this addition into the system? in a short period of time, and it was like a total success. It's I guess I'll say described, and reports are available on it. So that took us at least till the end of the second term, which was about 2012.
Phenomenal. And I look, I know maybe colleagues coming in from Scandinavian countries and others might say, look, we've had this sort of thing for a long time. But if you think in the context of Canadian provinces, Australian states and territories, other parts of the world, the US, across the many states, this hasn't necessarily been an absolute key priority and commitment from government. I know in my home state, we're only just starting to commit to this now, Michael. I think economic analysis on the returns to the individual and the country have been clear around this investment in early years. We know now from the science around the development of oral language, phonemic awareness, phonological awareness, all those foundational strengths lead to literacy and numeracy. It seems to be a no-brainer investment.
It does,
again, getting out in front of it ahead of many of the other systems around the world.
And Pascal, the commissioner, he certainly went on his study visits, included Scandinavia. So we knew what was going on in the best places, and it was a matter of just making the decision and making it thorough to be powerful, but not too complicated. Just even though it was complicated, there's the curriculum, there's the nature of the teaching force, there's the physical part of where they would do. There's figuring out how it integrates with the school principalship, and there's those like things. And we had people we appointed an assistant deputy minister, which is the level. There's a minister, the deputy minister, and the assistant deputy minister. We appointed a team just below that, one of the deputy ministers, whose job it was to focus on implementation of early learning, which he did and his team did for the 4 years after we started to adopt it.
It's powerful. Well, there we are, a great synthesis, Michael, of the work of so many, and you being embedded there as an advisor and learner in that work from about early 2004 for that 8 or so years. And it's wonderful to kind of hear the story in the right narrative, the narrative of getting that literacy and numeracy work, moving to the secondary work, then into the early learning, and getting each of those pieces in place with focus and with a shared theory of improvement, or theory of action, even though the actual way that played out across those various challenges you're working on looked a little bit different. So, Michael, why don't we leave it there for now? And in the next session, we might pick up, that, I guess maybe you want to just let us know a little bit. People got interested in Ontario, didn't they? Because you were actually moving the needle. Maybe take us as we close out this conversation of what was starting to happen by, the end of the first term and into the middle of the second term, around when you're writing, all systems go and wrong drivers and large-scale reform comes of age. What was happening in the global zeitgeist around their interest in Ontario?
Well, in that period, just before 2010, when I wrote that book, there was a growing interest in the world. PISA results were showing different results, and there was strong interest in the PISA group with Andreas Schleicher about what countries were doing well. It turns out that Ontario and a couple of other provinces, British Columbia, Alberta earlier, there was some good things happening in Canada, but we had the precise definition of why it was what we did that made it good. The others didn't. They just, I think they knew that it was better. But we started to get this major through the international thing. And we held a big conference around 2008. Andreas Schleicher spoke at it. And we said, this is what we've accomplished the first 4 years. It was in the Dalton's beginning of a second term, which would be 2007 or 2008. And we said, this is really working. And then we started to get some of the leaders, the research leaders of the US were calling and writing reports about why was Canada better than the US. And then one of the major ones that put us on the spotlight, we're still with them. There's a small foundation in California called the Stewart Foundation.
Okay.
So the Stewart Foundation have been investing money in capacity building for social development. And they started to send study teams just towards the end of Dalton's second term, and I was the host because I was the chief person. And so they would they put a bunch of money together. We had about at least 3 study visits. There would be the state superintendent from California,
Yes.
The people in the foundation, school principals, superintendents from around the state, people at the county superintendents, a lot of the leaders, head of the teacher unions. This was all California, and we would get a delegation of about 30 or 40 of them, and we would host them for 3 or 4 days. They would visit a school, they would do this, we'd have meetings with us, all of that. And I remember the most significant statement we kept getting from them. They said, when we go to a school and we ask people what the strategy is, and then we go to another teacher in the same school and ask that same question, and then we go to another school the next day and ask that, we're getting consistency all the 4, the 3 priorities, capacity building, results on the move. They were getting the story that from the schools that we said was actually what we were doing. There was a congruence there. And we used to think about this as valuable. We say, as part of our implementation, I want to sort of say it this way, Simon, that we used to say, a key indicator of whether or not it's happening is if people who are doing the work can talk the walk with specificity. They can explain to us what they're doing. They can explain to each other. They can explain to visitors. So this talking the walk became, and every time we integrated, or anytime we visited schools, which was a lot, this was all the time in our work, we would say to a group of people, what's working? Give us specific examples. What's not working? And what are they? And what should we do about them? So I want to really emphasize, we interacted around implementation with great consistency, always culling from the field what was working. When we found what was working, we would reframe that back to people with specificity because we knew, or when we found it wasn't working, we make sure we problem solve so we'll be able to talk about it the next time. So the going concern about this stuff is really critical among all those key actors all the time. That's where the contagion happens. If the strategy is good, if people feel it's the right thing to do, if they're making progress, it's that kind of momentum that's jammed into that 10-year period of 2003 to 2012.
Yeah, it's such a powerful insight. You know, Michael, a lot of people make benefit of, say, peer review or learning walks where leaders might come from one school and come and see what's occurring and talk to students and talk to teachers and leaders. And this is almost sort of a peer review / learning walk system to system where, hey, you've got nothing to hide. Come and see the schools and talk. These aren't teachers and leaders on script, right? These are teachers and leaders that have been learning their way into the work, sense making it. And so they can speak with authenticity and relevance and specificity because it's their work and they've been learning their way into how to make it work.
And then, because you have the book, you refer to All Systems Go. In that book, there are case studies of districts that are successful, Ontario districts. So I'm writing about them. Yeah, I'm writing and saying, okay, here's Ottawa. This is what they've been doing. Here's another one. So we were able to, because we wanted to capture it, partly to prove it, but partly for internal confirmation to our system that these things are working. And let's look at your peers. Let's learn from them, and let's realize that we, Ontario, are now in the international realm of system change, and people like what we're doing. That's how I would characterize the end of this period. The people really like what we're doing.
People like what you're doing. You've moved things over a given period of time, and you can articulate your theory of improvement. It's explicit and open. It's not just, well, the numbers are good and we're not quite sure what's caused it. That you've got an explicit theory behind it. Look, Michael, thank you so much for giving us this sort of deep dive into a story that many have interacted with, that Ontario whole system systemic reform journey. Maybe when we pick it up next time, we can start to think about what's still relevant from that time and what might be some of the things we'd need to add, adjust, move forward in order for a whole system reform strategy to be appropriate for the decade we're now in. Michael, always great to connect. I look forward to speaking with you soon.
Thanks, Simon. This is great. I love this there's lots to build on. Next time we'll do that.
Looking forward to it. Bye for now.
Bye.